in being here. Before we get started, I'd like to quickly introduce myself so you have an idea of who's talking to you for the next 30 or so minutes. Officially born and raised in the Netherlands as a German citizen, I spent pretty much most of my life in California, a little bit in Scotland, a little bit in Asia. Have 2 lovely kids, and pretty much my whole weekend is covered building Legos and playing with them. I tend to spend at a lot of conferences around the world. This is pretty much my day job for Revenate, what I do. And always, the cameraman poses me or captures me in weird questions and weird poses where I tend up to looking like really strange. So that will probably be the case as well today. And one of my favorite superheroes, I'm actually that much of a nerd that I have a superhero who is a professor in marketing. So I will tell you a little bit about him more today. His name is Mark Ritson. About my career, I started off in hospitality itself, worked for Chateau Elan Group, worked for Fairmont Hotels and Resorts in the US, in Scotland, and then moved to the marketing side where I worked at agencies like TBA Global and Gielissen, and now work for a company called Revenate, where we work with hotels, about 10,000 hotels around the world, helping them to get a better understanding of their guest. So that's what I'm talking about today: guest data, guest insights, guest intelligence. So the question of today, the question that we want to answer is guest data the new oil? And when you Google guest data or when you Google data and oil, you see millions and millions of hits. I think it's about 380 million at this point, and the number is still increasing. And it's very tempting to compare data to oil. But there's inherent problems comparing data like a natural resource like oil. And when we dive into the topic a little bit more, I want to kick off with a little bit a provocative statement and say, hotels don't really know their guests. I saw 3 hands earlier when the question was asked, what is the average age of your guest? Well, most hotels have actually no understanding of who their guests are, or what the guests like or dislike, and their preferences. And when earlier the conversation was going on a little bit about what do business guests want, I had to laugh a little bit, I had to snicker a little bit, because we came up with ideas like they want a location in the city center, or they want a desk, or they want a comfortable bed. But is that really what they want? And the problem is that there's multiple problems and multiple reasons why hotels don't have a guest, but the major problem of why hotels don't know their guests is these 4 pieces of information is the only thing that's required to actually process a reservation. If you look at the standards for processing a reservation in a hotel, check-in date, check-out date, first name and last name, and a confirmation number is the minimum bar required. And this is not guest knowledge. This is just basics. And there's a lot of reasons behind this: old technology, legacy systems, different data silos, relationships between owners, brands, operators, these type of things. But eventually, the lack of knowledge, the lack of misunderstanding of guests is really hurting hotels, is really hurting hoteliers. And I think the best example of that lack of knowledge, of lack of understanding, comes every year when Skift is a major research publication, does a research and asks hoteliers and asks travelers around the world, what do you think is important? Or what do you think is important for guests? And over, there's big discrepancies between what guests think important and what hoteliers think important is for guests. And the same thing we see when we work with hotels and actually start looking at our databases and start looking at how good is their guest data. There's very little data that they have on guests. They have very little profiles of guests. When you actually go one step deeper and you look at email addresses to be able to communicate with guests, or mobile phone numbers to communicate with guests, it even gets worse. The same thing happens with data like countries, gender, cities, and date of birth. And even sometimes when the data is there, the data is often incorrect. Still, the most popular country in the world where travelers come from, Afghanistan. The #1 pick list, and nobody bothers to change it, so Afghanistan is still the #1 country where travelers come from. Most popular date of birth, January 1, 1750. The default for many PMSs when you fill no information in all. So even when the data is there, the data is often very incorrect. And that's a shame, and that's unfortunate, because there's a lot of information that guests leave at the hotel. There's a very intimate relationship between the guest and the hotel, right? The guest sleeps in the bed of the hotel, but still hotels are unable to capture that information and actually build it into something of a guest profile, of a guest database inside, and actually provide or extract guest insights. And guest insights have potential for the hotel on two different sides. First of all, guest insights benefit the hotel on the marketing side. Better insights of your guest, better understanding of your guest, better knowledge of your guest can allow you to do better marketing. And secondly, it allows you to do better operational results. Hotels that have a better understanding of their customers do better financially. So let's look at those two. Starting off with marketing. Having a better understanding of your guest, having more data points about your guest, preferences, likes, dislikes, things like average booking window, length of stay, age, all lead to better understanding of what you can do in terms of marketing and lead to better marketing results as well. So when to send that email, when to communicate with that guest, can all be driven, can be decisions that can be driven by data insights. And we see this in hotels that operate with us as well. Hotels that have a better understanding of their guest will get higher engagement and will get higher revenue per guest eventually. Similar it is for guest insights and operational results. Hotels or companies in general that have better understanding of their guests and customers will have better operational results. And the interesting thing is that this doesn't happen directly to the bottom line. It happens because departments within the organization actually are able to cater to the wishes and needs of the customers much better, and from there drive much more efficiently and drive a better bottom line. And there's a professor who done a lot of research around this. This is Dr. Alex Klein, and he estimates that companies who are continuously investing in better insights and customer insights can drive up to 50% operational results versus companies that don't. But if it all was that easy, right? If it all was that easy to create those guest insights and get that guest knowledge, there would be all of us doing that. There's a lot of companies that don't, because there's a lot of challenges along the way to actually make that happen. And one of the major challenges when we ask hotels, these come up over and over again. Integrations, finances, and staff. So integrations with the industry is still a major problem. It's very difficult to connect systems like PMS systems, booking engines, CRS systems, and it's still very costly. Data often still lives in silos. It's unable to transfer from one system to the other to actually get richer and build upon itself. And at the second time, as I mentioned, finances is a big portion of that. It's very costly to build these integrations. Integrations cost of 10,000 euros plus is unfortunately still somewhat of a standard in this industry, which prohibits actually companies taking advantage of the data that they have. And as well as staff. Very few hotels are actually equipped with the right staff that has the right knowledge to actually take advantage of those data and use that data. So how to collect guest data, right? We know we want it, we know we need it. It has benefits for the hotel in terms of financial operations and marketing. The question is, how do you actually start collecting that data? So before we go into that, it is good to understand kind of how the world looks in terms of guest data. And these are the 4 type of buckets of guest data that we identified. Starting with identity data, quantitative data, descriptive data, and then the way to the right, qualitative data. And easy is all the way to the left, to the entity, and it gets harder and harder the more you get to the right. So identity is really the easy part. Profiles. Who stays in your guest? Name, address, location, male, female, date of birth, phone numbers, email addresses. That's really the core of the profile that you want to start collecting. On top of that, you can layer in quantitative data. Everything that you can measure, easily measure. Transactionals, online activity, guest satisfaction, things like that, that you can actually stitch to a profile and directly quantify with a number. From there, it gets a little bit already a little bit more tricky in terms of descriptive data, where you go into preferences and behaviors. And there's a big difference between preferences and behaviors. So if you ask guests what they want, you get different answers than what you observe and what they do. So a good example of that is asking guests if they want to eat healthy. If you ask me, you want to eat a healthy breakfast or a greasy breakfast, the answer would always be, I want to eat a healthy breakfast. But the night before, I have a couple drinks, and the next morning I show up at the breakfast buffet and load up on sausages and bacon. So behavior and preferences can be completely different things for guests. And then it gets into attitudes and opinions. And that's really the most challenging thing to capture. And it's even arguably not worth it for hotels to capture at this point, because there's not a lot of use cases at this point for using that data, and it's very difficult to distinguish what types of data you want to capture. When we work with hotels to actually start the process of getting better guest data and better guest insights, it is always a crawl, walk, run approach. Really, it starts with profiles, as I mentioned, being able to capture the profiles of every guest, being able to actually understand who stays in your hotel, basic profile information. From there on, you can layer in things like satisfaction, transactions, online behaviors, things that are measurable, and from there you can go to the more sophisticated things, preferences and attitude. It is impossible to start collecting everything at one point and get out of the gates right away, that way. So how do you start as an organization? How do you actually start this process? It starts with building data literacy. It starts by really building an organization that understands the impact and the power that data has. It understands with an organization that actually understands the flaws that data bring as well. As soon as you start collecting data, there are biases in data. There are gaps in data, and you need to understand as an organization, once you go into that process, you need to build up a literacy within your organization that be able to translate that data to actual use cases and in things that you can use within your hotel. From there, you set up a vision, a strategy, a scope. What do you want to do? Why do you want to do it? What is the use case of the data that you want to collect? And eventually, what is the end outcome that you want? And again, think small. Start with small things that you can actually directly input and directly start working on. And from there, you can layer on more things. Then it comes down to things like systems, security, and standards. You need to agree upon a common set of systems and a common set of standards that you held within your hotel. We see this over and over, especially within groups or hotel chains, where people interpreted different things different ways. Is the market code XYZ or ABC? It should be the same for everybody. So once you actually collect that data, A is the same for every hotel, and B is the same for every hotel. And this is key, because otherwise the data quality is not usable. And from there, you need to be transparent to your guest. You need to include your guest in this journey, in this conversation, right? You're collecting guest data. You're collecting information about the guests that are staying at your hotel. So you need to include them in that conversation. It depends a little bit on what study you read. This is one from the UK Chartered Institute of Marketing, marketing and organization in the UK, that says 51% of their questionnaires are willing to exchange data if it has a direct benefit for them. If you go to Germany, the number is definitely lower. If you go to the US, the number is definitely higher. But in general, people are willing to surrender data if there's a clear benefit for them. But build trust. It is a process that takes time. It is a process where you need to take the consumer, the guest with you, and go through that journey together. And avoid the temptation to directly push product and directly try to benefit from the data that you collected. So lastly, I want to look at 3 use cases, 3 different companies that use data and actually how they do it, and give some insights on the benefits they have with it. And it starts off with a management group called the Grand City Hotel Group that has done a fantastic job in actually normalizing the data. So the challenge that Grand City Hotel Group has, they have 120 hotels in 50 destinations, 15 different brands, from Best Westerns to Accors to high-end Hiltons to low-end budget hotels, but they needed to come up with one guest satisfaction matrix. It's not easy to compare, it's not easy to compare ADR, right? Some city hotels might actually drive a higher ADR than some non-city hotels. Occupancy, the same thing. When you have a hotel that's directly related to a convention center, occupancy may go up and down depending on the conventions that are there. But the thing that Grand City Hotels did was actually normalize guest feedback and the guest satisfaction. And they have come up with a way to actually study what guests are saying and say, understand if a guest is saying a 4.2 at a certain hotel will actually be the same as a 4.3 at another hotel in terms of guest satisfaction. And they've spent tremendous amount of effort and energy in understanding that the guest satisfaction matrix is the one thing that is equal on the board, that can compare hotel by hotel, brand by brand, type of hotel, star rating of hotel. Another example of understanding the data is Royal Garden Hotel. This is a hotel that's in London, close to Hyde Park. It's a luxury 4-star hotel. It isn't ultra luxury like some of the other hotels in London. It doesn't drive the extreme rates that other hotels in London are able to do. But what they've did is actually a deep dive in the guest data, and they switched the thinking around how they look at guests and what guests they're actually spending their time and attention on. So previously, they looked at guests and looked at the guests that complained the most, because those were the guests that were the most vocal. They left bad reviews, they were complaining, and those were the ones that were spending the most time and energy in actually fixing the issues with them. They actually took the bold step and said, you know what, we're not going to focus on the guests that complain anymore. They put them aside and said, we're actually going to focus on the guests that are happy, but we actually don't see them coming in return. We don't see the return rates we want those with those guests that are actually satisfied but don't return at all. And by rigorously segmenting their database, by rigorously actually focusing on certain groups that's spending a good amount of money at their hotel, that were very satisfied but would actually never come back, they would actually be able to increase this return rate of those guests by over 40%. Just by able to segment the database and just by able to say, I only focus on certain hotel guests that actually are making us money, that are booking on the right channels, that are spending the right amounts of money at my hotel, those are the guests that we want to come back. They could drive that loyalty within that group, and that really paid off. And if you look at the terms of marketing and segmentation and targeting, this is pretty much where the majority of the hotels are these days. One campaign, one type of message, one type of blast to the whole database, with very little success as a green pie. More and more hotels actually moving these days to smaller targeted messages, to targeted segments, being much more specific to audiences that they want to curate. And where we're going to in the future, with the help of machine learning and AI, is being able to run numerous campaigns, an infinite number of campaigns that is all automated and all personalized and all segmented to certain audiences. And with that, we'll see the revenue actually going increase. Last example is an example of Kimpton Hotels and Resorts, or hotels and restaurants as they're called. And I recently met with their commercial team, Kathleen Reidenbach is the head of commercial for Kimpton. And one of the things that stuck out for them is the way that they actually handle guest data within as well the properties as well at headquarters. And they've actually done a fantastic job in actually understanding the data and humanizing the data. And what I mean with that is 3 little examples. The first one is an example of anticipating needs. They really look at profiles, and they look at the insights that those profiles provide and anticipated needs that way. Welcome gifts are always personalized. Welcome letters are always personalized. Things that they do to actually take that data and humanize it when guests come on site. Secondly is surprise and delight. they do a massive amount of effort putting in surprise and delight for their guest. So this is one example of where a guest was actually a fan of David Bowie, and they actually put David Bowie records and a record player in his room just on that profile. They continuously go to their membership, they continuously look at their profiles, and be able to create that experiences, the surprise and delight experiences for their guest. And the last one is service recovery. Really look at the data, what guests are saying, what guests are actually complaining about online, and real time, find the guest, find the problems that they have, and work on service recovery items that are personalized. So as last is a little bit of closing off, a little bit of what we do as a company and how we do it. So within our company, we are actually able to ingest all types of different sort of data. So we connect with PMS systems, CRS systems, booking engines, websites, revenue management systems, and we all bring that together to create guest data for hotels. And what it eventually results in, that we're able to help hotels personalize guest journeys and automate that whole personalization process for hotels. So whatever it's a first-time guest for a hotel, they will get a different set of communication and messages than, for example, a VIP or somebody who has stayed at the hotel before. So as last, the question, is guest data the new oil? As I said, I think there's many problems with comparing data to oil and the thought of extracting it as a natural resource. But I think the major problem with that is that you forget the ownership of the data. Right? As a hotelier, you have the right and privilege to work with guest data. And that's the key of guest data. It is something that is still owned by the guest, not only by law, by GDPR these days, but also in terms of faith and in terms of trust. So conclusion, there's a lot of information and a lot of insights that hotels can drive from the guest behavior and the guest data. And there's definitely benefits financially, operationally, and on marketing level for those hotels to actually do their job and start collecting guest data and building that guest literacy. So that's it from my end. Thank you very much for your time. We'd love to connect with you if you have any questions or if there's anything on this right now.
Yes, we do. We have a lot of questions, Thomas. Thank you.
Thank you.
We will want to go on with some of them. And I really understand that we have a lot of practical questions because we are moving on the most important part of the practical issues conference, and the last block will be close to that as well. So one of the questions is, when we are talking about personalization, how can we use it for the hotel that is more than 150 rooms, or when the target auditory is only the group ones?
I'm sorry, so, the last portion of that?
What should we do, in other words, if the hotel is not the small one, but it's like huge property?
Yeah, the same as the example of the Royal Garden Hotel, they focus on the most important guest, right? It's important if you have a large hotel that you can actually satisfy all of them. So you need to make choices on the guests that you want to focus on. So when you go to the data and actually decide who you want to focus on, people that actually book direct, they're more profitable than people that book to an OTA. People that actually have a higher return rate, they're more profitable than people come from a one-off. People that spend money at your F&B outlets, they're more profitable than people that don't. So focus on those guests who are actually most profitable and most profitable in the long term for your hotel. So you always have to make choices. You always have to, consider what guest where you spend the most attention on. And how do you start? Again, you don't have to start by completely hyper-personalization, but start by, when you think about sending newsletters, when you think about doing communication, is this communication relevant for the audience that you're sending it to? Guests that traveled from the other side of the world are not interested in a newsletter that promotes, this weekend's activities, because the chances of them to arriving again at the hotel this weekend are 0 to none. So they want a different type of message. They want a message of inspiration to actually come back. But guests that are actually very local might actually be able to make it to the hotel this weekend or make it to the activities this weekend. So think about it. Is it relevant for the audience who is receiving this message? And I think that's a key thing, a rule of thumb to keep in mind.
Thank you. And we have not talked today about the loyalty programs. But for your opinion, which one is one of the best samples that could be replicated or be followed?
Yeah, so fun topic, but a large topic. So for me, if you ask hoteliers and hoteliers that run loyalty programs as the brands, why do they run loyalty programs? It's about the ability to actually collect guest data. Because loyalty members log into the hotel website, they identify themselves, and I'm actually this person, and they can identify that by that loyalty number, and with that way, it's easier for hotel brands to track the data and being able to connect it to the right profile. It's a big debate or a big topic if loyalty is actually working or not. I think there's definitely a room for loyalty programs, definitely in points-based. But I think loyalty comes from a lot of other angles as well. Instant gratification is something that people want these days. You know, coming for the second time, recognize that. Coming for the second time and getting another 100 points is irrelevant because it doesn't is enough for actually a whole stay. But something small. Thank you for coming again. Thank you for booking again. As a loyal member for coming for the second time, here's some drinks at the bar. Here's a little bottle of something in your room. Something like that, I think, will inspire more loyalty than me actually signing up to a loyalty program, spending a lot of money on that loyalty program and running that loyalty program that way. Recognizing the guest for actually the second or third stay, just by acknowledging that goes a long way.
Thank you. Do we have the questions from the hall? Yes. Could you please give the microphone? And until you are coming, I will ask just the short one about the new rules of GDPR. How do you use it while collecting the data through your solution?
Yeah, so GDPR, as it should, put the data in the hands of the consumer. So the consumer has the right, for his data or her data to be deleted, or to actually request what data is actually stored for that person within the hotel. There is, within some debate, and GDPR is relatively new, so we still have to see how far the law is actually being taken and when it's initially going to be cut off. But within the current situation, there's a lot of room for hotels to still collect that guest data. As I said, be transparent about what you collect. Be transparent about why you're collecting it. And actually make it beneficial for the guest to surrender that data. It's a conversation you should have with your guest, not about your guest, right? It's something you should include your guest in. Don't hide between long terms and conditions and very difficult to understand regulatory regulations and lawyer talk about why you collect data. Be open about it. I think that goes a long way. I see GDPR as a good thing for both the industry and for the guest. Guests want the security that their data is safe, the data is stored properly, and the data is not sold. And that's what GDPR guarantees. And I think there's enough, working with hotels, there's still enough room for hotels to actually operate within the law and being able to do more and more to collect guest data and use that data as well.
Okay. Thank you. And we have the question. Could you please switch on the phone?
Слышно, да? Спасибо.
Can you hear me now? I have a question. We are interested. What would be the cost of a good data collection per room or per client? And is the price of data collection different for a chain or for individual hotel?
Hotel and independent one.
So the second question, difficult to answer. Let's start with the first question. Collecting data is not free, definitely not. Is there a positive return on investment? Is there actually more money to be made? And are hotels actually making more money by spending energy and looking at guest data and spending that energy and actually doing that? Absolutely. We see both on the marketing side and the operational side, hotel driving more direct bookings, actually bringing down the cost of acquisition, acquiring that customer to come back. So in the end, the cost of investing in data and actually understanding that customer is a net positive return for the hotels that we work with. Is there a difference between brands and non-brands? Absolutely. I don't know the exact difference at this point in terms of percentages or how that relates.
Let me maybe help with the answer. In average, the marketing budget is like 205% from the gross revenues in the hotel that really puts attention on the marketing efforts. For how many percent the collection of data will increase this cost?
So let me put it the other way. What is the average cost these days of Booking.com or Expedia? 10, 12, 14%? What we see in Europe more and more, in London, in markets that are very, very kept by Booking.com and Expedia, is that the rates go up. So driving direct business, driving repeat bookings directly to your hotel is still more efficient and more cost efficient than that cost of the data captures. Again, the start of a hotel, what you can do tomorrow is not by building a data warehouse and actually starting collecting data and buying tens of thousands of euros or dollars in server rooms. It is by actually making small steps to actually start being more thoughtful about what does it mean to actually start collecting data as a hotel? What does it actually mean to build literacy around data collection? What type of questions do I have and do what I want to know from my guest? These type of things you should do and are able to do without actually large investments in data infrastructure and things like that. So it is not necessarily the cost, it is the shift in thinking around how do I collect guest data. And if there are secondary systems or other systems required, that might be the case. But it starts with actually putting data on top of mind versus building data centers and building data warehouses that actually store it.
Thank you, Thomas. One more question, the last one, and we'll give you free for today.
Thank you.
Доброго дня, чути?
Hello, can you hear me? Well, the easiest thing has passed. We have collected the data. You said how you store it, GDPR, okay. But the most interesting thing is how to use it later in the general trend of that people are now mobile, they want to travel, they don't want to stay long in one place. Will there be a new sphere in hospitality? Data analysts who will be able to analyze it fast and who will be able to offer something new for the clients.
The question, because we have heard today that loyalty, they are not working and the hotels, the guests, they not stay at the hotel more than 4 times, it was told by Andrew today. Mm-hmm. So when you started to collect the data, after that you have to use them. What for you have to dedicate this if the guests don't want to be at the same place? Does it mean that this new service appears on the market?
I think what I understand from you is there's definitely guests that are never coming back to your property. There's always guests that will stay one time at your property and never come back. My recommendation is not to focus on that type of guest, on those guests. What I'm advocating for is there's guests that come to your hotel 1 time, 2 times, 3 times. The first time they come to Booking.com, the second time they come to Booking.com, Expedia might be the 3rd time. Focus on that portion of guests, actually making them loyal or directly to your hotel. The same thing as that guest may be coming to Kiev multiple times. First time they stay at your hotel, second time they may stay at a competitor. Make sure that you drive that repeat business for actually guests that are coming back to the city. Tourist, one-off travelers, there's a large portion of the market is there. But if you actually go and you can start doing this tomorrow by going into your property management system and then actually understanding who are my guests that are coming back for the second time or third time or fourth time. And when they come back, then inspire that loyalty. Thank you for coming back. Hey, I see you're here for the second time. Great to have you actually back at the hotel. These type of actions you can take directly to thank your customers for coming back and being loyal with your property. I don't know if I fully answered.
Ви отримали відповідь?
Thank you very much.
And I am